My high support needs students, I think that this one's pretty common, but we have things like universal core boards around the classroom. We utilize supports like single message switches. So that way, if they can't access their spoken language, they have some different options, things like whiteboards. And then within the high school setting, for my low support needs students who are maybe speaking self-generating sentences. A lot of these students for me were even in honors and AP classes, things like utilizing break cards, utilizing scripts in their notes app on their phone, utilizing some free text-to-speech apps, whiteboards, and things like that. So that way they always have multiple options should they lose access to their spoken language.
Hey there, and welcome to the Speechy Side Up podcast. My name is Vanita Litvack, and I am so grateful you're here. I'm an ASHA certified speech language pathologist, author, and augmentative and alternative communication consultant who is obsessed with helping SLPs like you stop reinventing the wheel and connect with other SLPs in the trenches. Have you ever wondered how other SLPs seem to be doing it all with ease? Well, around here, you'll get to hear firsthand how SLPs are really getting things done while keeping evidence-based practice and self-care in mind. Think of this as a coffee date with your SLP friends. Get ready to be challenged and encouraged while we learn together. As both a parent and a professional, I've seen behavioral strategies everywhere, whether it's in swimming lessons, sleep training, or classrooms. I believe there's a more effective and compassionate way to support young kids that honors their emotions and encourages real growth. That's why I'm thrilled to share our upcoming event with you called Behavior Connect, Prioritizing Connection First on November 15th, 2024. This event is all about moving beyond traditional behavior strategies to foster authentic connections with children. We've assembled an incredible lineup of speakers, including Carrie Ebert, Rachel from PTSD SLP, Iris from EF Toolkit, Dr. Diamond Rashad, Jackie Jebian Garcia from Create Yourself Co., and more. You can grab your free live ticket now by visiting aboutbehaviorconnect.com or clicking on the link in the show notes. Don't worry if you can't make it live. We will have affordable options to upgrade for replays and CEUs during early access registration starting October 21st, 2024. Get on the list so you don't miss any updates. All right, let's dive into today's episode of the Behavior Connect series. Today, I'm joined by Katelyn Kelps. Katelyn has been an SLP since 2015 in the school setting. She owns a small private practice, a teachers pay teachers store, and runs the communication classroom on Instagram. She is passionate about AAC, Gestalt language development, and neurodiversity affirming practices. Katelyn, thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
So, does that cover everything, or is there anything else you'd like to add before we talk about multimodal communication and what it's like being a neurodivergent SLP?
I think that covers it.
Awesome. Okay, so let's just dive right in. How do you incorporate multimodal communication for neurodivergent individuals of all support needs?
Absolutely. So my high support needs students, I think that this one's pretty common, but we have things like universal core boards around the classroom. We utilize supports like single message switches. So that way, if they can't access their spoken language, they have some different options, things like whiteboards. And then within the high school setting, for my low support needs students who are maybe speaking self-generating sentences. A lot of these students for me were even in honors and AP classes, things like utilizing break cards, utilizing scripts in their notes app on their phone, utilizing some free text-to-speech apps, whiteboards, and things like that. So that way they always have multiple options should they lose access to their spoken language.
Yeah, that's so important that you have access to all of those communication modalities and they're easily available for your students. You're
Yes.
working in the school setting, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And even just kind of normalizing that for a lot of our students, I think is important. A lot of my neurodivergent students don't realize even until we point it out that losing access to that spoken speech is something that comes along with being neurodivergent. So even explicitly teaching that and then teaching the steps of problem solving
Yeah.
around that.
That's great. Since you are in a school setting, how do you increase school team collaboration and education regarding neurodiversity?
With baby steps, it's definitely something that you can't kind of go full in on. Typically, I start with 1 or 2 students and just 1 or 2 areas about their neurodiversity and things that we might want to look at changing. So typically, I look at our students with kind of the most quote unquote behaviors that people find odd or different and kind of how we can change our perspectives about that. So our students that might be a little bit more cranky with their teachers or things like that. So that way everyone can work together, student, teachers, me, in a more collaborative way so the student's more successful.
I love
I
that.
off Yeah, and I often use myself. I am diagnosed ADHD, some tendencies of some other neurotypes, so I often use myself as an example because I think especially in the secondary setting, a lot of times you get met with comments like, "But this isn't real life," or "They can't do this as an adult," and so then using real life examples of how neurodivergent adults that the teachers may know utilize these accommodations, I think, and things I think is very impactful and kind of helps them make that shift.
I think that's a great way to go about it. And this conversation is so poignant right now for my career and the setting that I'm working in. I had a conversation today with an ABA therapist and the RBT, and we, as a team, decided that a communication board on a lanyard would be best for my gestalt language processing client who is now in stages 4 and 5 and no longer really prefers to use for communication device, but we want to still provide access. And we were talking about whether the lanyard should be worn all day long or only brought out when the client is having communication difficulties. And I was so scared about suggesting that it be worn all day long. And it was met with a little bit of resistance, but thankfully, I had some tools in my toolbox and examples to bring up. And one of them was like thinking about a child who uses glasses, maybe to read the board, but doesn't need it for things that are to read things that are closer up. And I think that resonated with them. And it was a lot of just checking in like, is that going to be okay? Do you want this smaller? Do you want this made in a different way? I know you're going to be wearing it all day long, and that's a lot to ask of you. We could also like put the board laminated on the table where the child sits. But we all ultimately decided that the lanyard would be the best for the children.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think anytime we can relate things back to, like, glasses, wheelchairs that are utilized all the time, hearing aids, I
Yeah.
think that kind of clicks for communication devices for people a ton also.
Yes, yes. And I think that I like the idea of the hearing aids. I'll definitely use that one in the future too, because glasses is like definitely more common, but I agree. They're more widely accepted and we need
Yes,
to shift that.
yes, and I think going from, like, I think a lot of times, especially when we're collaborating with behavior-based professionals, a lot of times AAC is looked at as a behavior support.
Mhm.
And it's not a first then board. It really is a medical device. So when we can relate it back to medical devices, I think that kind of brings it full circle.
Yeah, and it is hard, like if the client is very verbal
Mhm.
too, for them to understand, okay, so why do I need to implement this as well?
Yes.
But yeah, with glasses, sometimes they don't always wear them.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I always too use the example of ordering a pizza
Mhm.
because I will never call to order a pizza. So if I get to make that choice, our kids should also. And that usually makes people laugh and kind of pause and think about times that they choose not to call someone even and choose kind of an alternative access for themselves to communicate or set an appointment or things like that.
Okay, so you're saying, because I haven't heard this example before, you instead of calling, you prefer to
Oh,
like
yeah. Order it online, order it through the app, and I think that that always because then people are like, "Oh, you're right, I never call to order pizza, and that's my choice. I can, it's an option," but
yeah.
nobody does, which I think is helpful too, to kind of put it back on themselves of the amount of times that we, as speaking individuals, choose not to use our spoken language.
Mhm. That's a great example. Another good tool for people to use when trying to get team collaboration. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
So, what are some affirming approaches to increasing functional communication?
I think we all kind of the gold standard of just modeling without expectation. Um, the other thing that I like to teach teams too, though, is that it's not just about modeling without expectation for the student, but also for ourselves. So you feel a little bit of frustration that as adults we can work through, but then we're modeling it like maybe we're a little bit more frustrated. So the phone's not working in the classroom. And so I'm going to put it down and say, wow, I'm really frustrated. I need help. Can anybody help me? And I might specifically gain attention from another adult using their name and ask them to come over using language that maybe isn't so much my language, but that we might be modeling for the students. So I might say, Miss Kelps, come here, help me. Phone broken. Just to kind of work through that problem solving and model that also. So it's not just about modeling for the students, but modeling all day in those real situations. And again, normalizing it. I think something so big for our neurodivergent learners is everything is so hard. So anytime we can normalize everyone else needing help, everyone else communicating like that is huge and definitely kind of helps with that functional piece.
I love that. So, you've mentioned that you have ADHD and maybe some other, did you say neurotypes, characteristics?
And
Oh,
yeah, I said tendency.
okay. Of being a neurodivergent SLP, what has that been like?
I am an adult diagnosed ADHD individual, and I did well in school. I love to learn. So it wasn't really until my adult life that things kind of started to fall apart. I have terrible executive functioning. Everything is always in shambles and messy. And that's been my whole life. But I think as a kid, we often kind of put that off on, oh, they're just a kid. They'll learn how to clean up it later in life. But for our neurodivergent individuals, unless I'm specifically taught, I'm not learning how to organize things and tidy as I go. So, personally, difficult. Within my private practice, it's been great. It's something that I can connect to families about. Typically, I'm working with obviously neurodivergent individuals, but we also know that that means their parents are typically neurodivergent as well. So, that's a nice kind of connecting point. They understand how I communicate. The schools, on the other hand, can be a little bit more difficult, which I think helps me be a better school-based speech pathologist. It helps me connect to my students better, but then it can also be hard because I'm finding that that's really how I found out I was neurodivergent is all of a sudden I was like, you and me are the same about my students. And so trying to figure out how to utilize accommodations and things like that is really hard. And I think that's why I often use myself as an example for staff also, is because I'm in my 30s trying to figure this out, and our kids are only 14 to 18, trying to figure out kind of where they fit in the world, how to use accommodations, why they need accommodations, which accommodations work, and all of that. So if it's hard for me as a grown up who's supposed to be fully functioning in this world, how hard is it for our students?
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that and sharing about your experience. I chuckled a little bit because you're right. It's like, I'm supposed to be working on this executive functioning goal, but I need executive functioning goals as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, my students always like when we would sit down and work on study skills or organizing and things like that, they'd like look around my office and be like, "Oh," I'm like, "Do what I say, not what I do. It's fine."
Right, right.
And even sharing that with my students always helped too, of knowing that the skills that they have are going to come in waves. So sometimes they come in and be like, "Your office is clean," and I'm like, "I hyper focused on it and I got it done." Um, and just kind of working through that and again normalizing that you're not going to have the same skills every day as a neurodivergent individual, and that's okay. But then how do we kind of compensate for that, advocate for that, and use that functional communication even across support needs?
Mhm. Yeah, that's great. Is there anything else you want to share before we finish up today?
I don't think so.
Well, this has been awesome. And I know people are going to want to find and connect with you, check out your TPT resources. So, where can they find you?
They can find me at the Communication Classroom on Instagram, and then they can also email me if they want. That's linked on my Instagram at kelps.thecommunicationclassroom at gmail. And then it's the communication classroom on Teachers Pay Teachers as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kaitlyn. This has been great, and I can't wait to follow along.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. By the way, have you joined the SSU crew yet? By joining, you get access to the free good section on our website, plus podcast updates, special event notifications, and therapy inspiration. You can sign up at bit.ly/join SSU crew, all lowercase, or just find the link in this episode description. Also, don't forget to take a screenshot of this episode so that you can always refer back to it and share it on social media if you really love the topic. Take care and remember to always fill your speechy side cup first before you can pour into others.